you doing, guys? Today, the little mule's going under some surgical repair. We're not modifying this tractor anymore. It's done. But when I ran it with that small 2-inch pulley, ever since then I've been getting some axle bearing noise out of it. When I originally took apart that transmission, I never replaced the bearings. They all looked fine, but when I put it together and then put it back in the tractor, I was getting a little bit of a noise, or a little crunching noise out of the axle bearings, both of them actually. But ever since I spun the transmission pretty fast, not like lightning fast, but faster than it was designed to roll, that sound has just gotten worse. Even when you push the tractor, you can hear the bearings just grinding in there. And then at low speed, even with the loud muffler that I have, you could still hear those bearings kind of crunch, 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 crunch. So before it totally blows out the axles, I'm going to replace the bearings and the seals. I mean, the seals are basically brand new. They're not even a year old, but I'm going to have to destroy them to get it out. So today's project is to get the transmission out of the tractor. Now, I would show you how to do this in general, but to get this transmission out has absolutely nothing to do with how a transmission comes out of a wheel horse in general, because I've made so many modifications to this tractor in order to get that transmission in. I mean, I might show you, but in general, what I would show you would be only specific to this tractor. So let me get to work. Let's get this thing dissected. Now let's get that transmission out. With the exterior of the transmission field stripped, I have everything off it. The brake drum, the band, the hubs, the input pulley, all that's all been field stripped. Right now I am at the point now I'm going to put it on the hand truck, drag it into the garage, so that way we can crack the case open and take a look-see at what's going on inside that transmission. Hopefully it's just the axle bearings. And the little mule here will sit quietly, probably until next spring, but for right now it's going to sit quietly until I can get this surgical repair completed. Okay, so with the 6 bolts off, I just took a small screwdriver, actually this one right here, and, right there, sorry, and I just started to try to separate the cases right here. That way if I chipped a little bit of the cast iron, it really doesn't make a big difference, because number one, it's the top. Number two, it's in this bolt area where there really wouldn't be any oil to leak out. But I didn't. Everything came apart just fine. Now with the screwdriver wedged in there, the next thing I did was I took my knife, got the blade into between the two case halves, and then I just used my hammer, this little ball peen hammer, and I just tapped the knife, tap, 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 all the way across, all the way around, until I got the cases to open up just a hair. Then from there, I just took this screwdriver, slipped it in, and just lightly tapped with my hammer all the way down until the 2 drift pins popped. Now I have it completely popped open. As you can see, it made a colossal mess, as you would expect. I had a piece of cardboard up here initially, but I should have known that there was still a lot of oil left in it, even though I drained it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of manhandle this now to get the 2 case halves apart, get them physically apart, so we can take a look at the inside of one of the cases. With the cases physically apart, we can take a look at the gears, and in this case, I don't see anything with the gears per se being an issue. The one thing that is kind of interesting, when I originally assembled this transmission, I put some white grease in the bearings just to lube them up, to just pre-lube them. And everywhere you look, the white grease just didn't break up, which is kind of weird. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to clean these bearings out and get that white grease out of the way. It's on this side of the case too. So we are going to now just kind of pull all these gears apart. Just in general, they all kind of slide off. Like this one comes off, and then where this gear comes out of play, comes out, and I think I have Woodruff key. I think. I'm trying to remember how to take it apart with one hand, but essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this all apart, and then we'll start cleaning up these gears and taking a look at those bearings themselves. As you can see, I have everything all cleaned and wiped out. I didn't really show too much involved with the disassembly because I've shown that before in other videos, and I wasn't going to kind of like, rehash things that I've already done. One of the main reasons, as I indicated, that tearing this transmission apart is the outer axle bearings, the Torrington bearings in the case. Both sides were bad. They were crunching real bad. So I ordered up the new bearings, and the part number for the bearing is a Torrington bearing. Let's see if I can get that to focus for us. But it is B1816. That is the Torrington bearing number. That is the replacement. Basically, it's 1 1/8 inner, 1 3/8 outer. I believe it's 1 inch in thickness. It is Torrington style. It does drop into the case in that fashion. I do have a socket of almost equal external diameter. I'll use this to press the bearing in. The piece of tape is marks how far down into the case I want the bearing to go itself. Pretty simple process. Make sure you clean the bearing inside and out. Get all the all of the protectant material off it. Make sure the inside of the case itself is clean. Take a little bit of engine oil right there. Just lube this a little bit. Lube the outside of the bearing shell itself, and then just make sure it's straight to start with, and then just very carefully press. Now I am using an old Dake press. I mean, this isn't the type of press that you would typically use for installing a bearing or a bushing of this style, but for my cases, it doesn't require a whole lot of pressure, and it is definitely a lot better than beating it with a hammer. All right, so let me get this cleaned up, set up, and pressed in. Both bearings are installed. I took an axle, put an axle in both of them, just to make sure that everything moved nice and freely. Everything does. I'm real happy with the way that feels. It is actually tighter. There is no slop up or down. The old bearings did have a little bit of play up and down. Now both of these are dialed in just the way they need to be. Obviously, I pushed it down into the case a little bit, so that way when I put my oil seal in place, there will be plenty of room for that to seat just the way I want. Next, I'm going to start working on the differential. With the differential up here on the workbench, one of the things I like to do, and I should have done it on this transmission originally, but I was kind of in a rush. I wanted to get it done. So these axle bearings going out on it is now giving me the opportunity to do a couple things that I like to do to these wheel horse transmissions. Whether or not they make a difference in longevity or performance, I don't know. I just feel comfortable doing it. When you take these things apart, you notice that there is quite a bit of slop in all of the shafts. And what I mean by that is I don't have the pinion gears in the differential. The 8 pinion gears are out. I do have 2 bolts, one here, one on the bottom, tightened down, snugged down to keep the sides tight with the bowl gear. I do have the axle gears on the axles themselves. And what you notice with a wheel horse tractor is this. There is a lot of play in the axles in the rear end. So as you're going along, these axles are constantly sliding in and out. Whether or not that makes a big difference, it's to be argued. I don't know. Well, basically what I did was I measured the in and out play. I went to the hardware store and I got a thrust washer, 1 1/8 inch diameter, 1 3/4 outer diameter, and basically what I'm doing now is I'm just sanding this thing down in order to fit between one of the axle gears and the case side in order to take that slop out. Now, right now it fits pretty tight. Oh, not tight, snug. You can still, the axles turn with a little bit of force, and there's no side-to-side play whatsoever. I just shim one side of it, so theoretically one axle is that much shorter than the other one, but I think it definitely makes the differential perform in a better fashion. So let me just continue filing, or I should say sanding on my flat plate here, this bushing down, and I'll slide it in. I'll show you how it goes in, and we'll get this thing together. For visual aid, here's what I meant. Here's the side, I guess the side cover, side case of the differential. Here is the axle. Here's the axle gear that I'm talking about just a second ago. And here's my shim. The shim is between the case and the axle gear. So when you put it together, this actually slides together like that. And that shim is just between the gear and the gear case, or the differential case side cover. And that's what takes up the slack. Now I'm going to sand this a little bit more. And once I get it all kind of situated to where I want it, I'll show you how much of the slop is taken out of the rear end. I have the differential put back together. The bolts are tightened down. I just got standard bolt or standard nuts here, not lock nuts. I actually have a set of lock nuts here that I'll use when I put this differential back together for the final time. I also have some 5/16 even though these are 3/8 bolts, I have some 5/16 hardened washers that I just gently filed out in order to get the 3/8 bolt in. And the reason why I use the 5/16 on this side of the differential is this is where the big huge brake gear goes, and there's really not a lot of room between the side cover of the differential and that brake gear. The other thing too is the original washers, one of these right here, one of them's cracked and broken. So that was that was like the main reason it necessitated me to go ahead and upgrade those washers to these 5/16 grade 8 washers. Now, with that being said, the shim that I made is on this side of the differential. It's actually between this axle gear and this side cover. I have this piece of metal here just to chuck it, so that way when I turn the axles to show you, it doesn't roll off the workbench. Now, you'll hear some gear noise only because there is no lubrication in this. It's dry. One thing to note is that the pinion gears themselves, let me do it this way. You could just hear a little bit of knocking. That's because each one of them is free. None of them are pinched. That has absolutely zero to do with the shim. The shim also has nothing to do with the seating of the side cases or the side covers. They are fully seated and mated to the bowl gear in the center. Now, when I take the axle and I spin the axle, everything spins nice and free. Again, you just hear a little bit of that gear noise only because there's no lubrication. Go ahead and we grab the end of the axle and we go back and forth. There's absolutely no play. There's absolutely nothing. That is perfectly, in line. Everything is lined up real nice. Again, absolutely no play. So this differential is ready to be blown apart. Everything needs to be cleaned, lubricated, and then it can be put back together, and it's ready for installation into the transmission. I think this is, I'm going to cut this video off here. I know my videos have gotten a little bit long lately, and I apologize for that. If you found this interesting or you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. I do have a number of little small engine and transmission projects coming up, as well as updates on the senior project. Please click the bell if you could. That way you can get notified when I do put up a video. As always, guys, thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.